There was a time when an entire country was captivated not by gold, not by land, not even by spices, but by flowers. Delicate, colorful, and exotic flowers. The tulip, with its vibrant petals and mysterious rarity, swept across 17th century Netherlands with such force that it became more than just a plant. It transformed into a symbol of wealth, a token of status, and eventually, the fuel of what many historians call the world's first great speculative bubble. Tulip Mania. At first glance, it almost feels absurd. How could something as fragile as a flower, something that wilts within days, command the price of a luxurious house, or even the income of a lifetime? Yet this very absurdity reveals a truth about human behavior, one that echoes across centuries and across markets. When desire meets scarcity, when imagination fuels greed, people are willing to gamble their fortunes on the flimsiest of hopes. Let us step back to 17th century Netherlands. At the time, the Dutch Republic was one of the most dynamic economies in the world. It was a rising power in global trade, its ships dominating commerce from Asia to the Americas. Amsterdam was not only a bustling port, but also the birthplace of some of the earliest stock exchanges and modern financial institutions. This was a society in love with trade, speculation, and the promise of wealth. Against this backdrop, the tulip arrived. Tulips were not native to Europe. They were introduced from the Ottoman Empire, and their rarity and striking beauty immediately fascinated collectors. Some tulips even displayed unusual flame-like patterns on their petals, caused by a mosaic virus unknown at the time. To the Dutch, these were not imperfections, but marks of uniqueness, making the flower even more desirable. As with any rare and fashionable object, demand quickly outpaced supply, and prices began to rise. At first, tulips were exchanged among the wealthy elite. Owning rare bulbs was a way of signaling sophistication and prosperity. But as word spread of their soaring value, more and more people wanted in. What began as a niche interest of the rich soon spread across merchants, artisans, and even farmers. Tulips moved from gardens to marketplaces, and finally into the realm of financial contracts. This was where things began to take on a life of their own. Tulips weren't just bought and planted, were traded as promises of future delivery. Futures contracts allowed people to speculate without ever touching the flower itself. This was called wind handle, literally wind trade, because so much money was changing hands over bulbs that were not yet dug up, not yet delivered, and sometimes not even grown. The tulip, once a flower, became an idea, and ideas can inflate much faster than reality. As the frenzy grew, stories emerged that seemed too wild to be true, but many were. A single rare bulb could be worth as much as a luxurious house on a canal. Some were said to exchange their life savings or entire estates for a single flower. The psychology behind it was powerful. If your neighbor was getting rich overnight by trading tulips, why shouldn't you? Fear of missing out is not a modern invention. It was alive and thriving in 17th century Holland. This speculative fire burned hotter and hotter until, inevitably, it collapsed. In February 1637, confidence suddenly vanished. Perhaps a few auctions failed to attract buyers, or perhaps people simply realized that prices had risen far beyond reason. Contracts were broken. Sellers flooded the market, but buyers disappeared. In a matter of weeks, tulip prices crashed, leaving those who had entered late, the majority of small merchants, artisans, and ordinary citizens in financial ruin. The Dutch economy did not collapse entirely, as is sometimes dramatized, but many individuals faced bankruptcy, and the shock left deep scars in collective memory. Authorities attempted to regulate, to settle disputes over broken contracts, but the damage was done. Tulip Mania became one of history's cautionary tales, a vivid reminder of how speculation, greed, and herd psychology can overwhelm reason. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Was Tulip Mania truly the first bubble? Some historians argue that there were earlier examples of localized crazes and asset overvaluations. Others note that while tulip prices did collapse, the long-term economic effects on the Netherlands were not as catastrophic as popular myth suggests. What is undeniable, however, is that Tulip Mania left us with a powerful metaphor. Whenever markets rise too fast, when enthusiasm outruns reality, commentators reach back to the 17th century and whisper, "This feels like tulips." And so we arrive at our present day, where a new flower of speculation seems to bloom in the digital garden of finance. Bitcoin. Could Bitcoin be the tulip of our age? Or is it something fundamentally different? At first glance, the similarities are striking. Bitcoin, like tulips, began as something novel and exotic, understood only by a small group of enthusiasts. Its early adopters valued it not only for practical reasons, but also for its symbolism. A break from tradition, a new way of imagining value. Like tulips, Bitcoin became a status object, a sign that you were ahead of the curve. As demand grew and supply was limited, prices soared. Stories of people getting rich overnight spread like wildfire. And just like in 17th century Holland, ordinary people began to wonder, am I missing out? Should I be part of this new gold rush? We have seen dramatic price increases and equally dramatic crashes. Fortunes made and lost, sometimes in the span of weeks. The psychological factors are familiar. Fear of missing out, the greater fool theory. The idea that no matter how high the price climbs, someone else will come along willing to pay more. On the surface, the comparison is tempting. Bitcoin is just Tulip Mania dressed in digital code. And yet, to stop there would be two misimportant differences. Tulips had no lasting utility beyond beauty and status. Once the craze ended, they returned to being what they always were, flowers. Bitcoin, however, exists in a digital ecosystem where its utility continues to evolve. It serves as a decentralized store of value, a medium of exchange beyond borders, and a hedge against inflation for those who distrust traditional currencies. Unlike tulips, Bitcoin spawned an entire technological and financial infrastructure. Blockchains, smart contracts, decentralized finance. Even if its price were to collapse tomorrow, the technological revolution it inspired would remain. Critics argue that Bitcoin produces no cash flows, no dividends, and thus has no intrinsic value, a point that echoes the criticism of tulip bulbs. Supporters counter that its scarcity, guaranteed by mathematical design, and its independence from governments, give it unique value in a world where trust in institutions is often fragile. So, is Bitcoin a bubble, or is it a paradigm shift? The answer may depend on how you define value. If you see value only in physical goods or traditional cash flows, Bitcoin looks like speculation. If you see value in decentralization, in protection from inflation, in new forms of digital trust, then Bitcoin looks like innovation. What Tulip Mania teaches us is not just about flowers or bubbles. It is about ourselves. It shows how easily human beings can be swept up by desire, how we can convince ourselves that this time is different, how we can rationalize the irrational when crowds move in the same direction. But history also teaches us that not every rise in prices is a bubble, and not every innovation is a scam. Sometimes what begins in speculation matures into something lasting. The question we face with Bitcoin is whether it will follow the path of tulips, remembered as a strange episode of mass delusion, or the path of truly transformative innovations like the internet, which began with hype but changed the world. Perhaps the real lesson is humility. Markets will always test our patience, our greed, and our wisdom. It is up to us to remember that behind every bubble and behind every coin lies the same human heart, full of fear and hope. Tulip Mania may have wilted centuries ago, but its lessons bloom anew each time we encounter a wave of speculation. Whether Bitcoin proves to be a bubble or a breakthrough, only time will tell. But one truth remains constant. Finance without ethics, without reflection on our motives and our limits, is a garden always at risk of being overrun by weeds. Thank you for joining me today. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Together, we can make finance a force for good.